Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast. Today, I am joined by Davison from Ease Access Consulting, a disability access consultant with both professional expertise and powerful lived experience. Megan is an autistic woman, married to an autistic man, and mum to two autistic daughters. She's deeply passionate about breaking down barriers for people with non-visible disabilities, especially in schools and workplaces. In this episode, we're diving into what schools are legally required to do under the Disability Discrimination Act and how parents can get the right supports in place and what to do when schools aren't holding up their responsibilities. If you've ever wondered how to make sure your child gets the access and inclusion that they deserve, that chat is for you. So welcome, Megan. How are you going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks. I'm just in between a workshop at the moment on creating neurodivergent friendly work education spaces at university. So it's real and present discussions.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you for taking the time to come out and chat with us.
Pleasure.
So let's just dig into the Disability Discrimination Act, because some parents who are raising autistic children, some parents who are raising neurodivergent children may not necessarily know what this is. So
Yeah,
can you just go through what that means and what it stands for?
sure. So the Disability Discrimination Act has been around for just over 40 years. It's currently under review because it is a bit old. Um, the the Disability Discrimination Act is one of four acts that sit under the Australian Human Rights Commission. So you've got disability discrimination, sex discrimination, gender discrimination, and age discrimination. All these acts have been complaints based. So the person that's experienced harm or discrimination has to then have the confidence, the strength, the power to go to the Human Rights Commission to seek a remedy. Fortunately, in the review of the Disability Discrimination Act, which I'll shorten to DDA because I'll trip over it, I'm sure, it's currently under review. And that review is modelled on a review that I was involved about 3 years ago on sex discrimination. And it actually reversed the duty. So the employer, the school, the workplace, the business now has to prevent discrimination. So it's not a complaints-based law. And the DDA review, currently open right now and comments close this Friday, is also moving to that regime, which is called a positive duty. So let's prevent discrimination. Let's not wait for it to happen and then complain about it. Let's prevent it. This has some amazing, amazing benefits. A, it doesn't put the onus on the person traumatised. B, it actually elevates the conversation around discrimination because each duty holder is required to put in place policies and procedures in advance of anything happening. So they're two really great outcomes. What it means also is that the Australian Human Rights Commission becomes a regulator and can enforce those laws. They're not a regulator right now, except for sex discrimination. So the DDA is, look, it's a really powerful act. It's pretty unique around the world, but it's really old. And the definition of disability is really the medical model, the impairments, the deficits, the disorders, and things like that. So coming out of the massive Disability Royal Commission about 5 years ago, there was a discussion about actually modernising that language, which of course is critical as well, because we aren't talking about disorders, deficits, differences, inadequacies, or being lesser. It's about, okay, the social model of disability it's the environment around us. It's society causing the disability. And so that conversation will really, really expand. So that awareness raising piece is really, really important as well. But the prevention is, it's a no-brainer. Let's not harm anyone. let's not harm anyone. So it's just taken a long time to actually get to this point. But I would say that given the review, there's been a whole number of consultations. The formal submission process is due, as I mentioned, on Friday. Probably will take about 12 to 24 months for the law to actually come into force. But in that time, there'll be a massive conversation within society, and people will, and organisations will need to put in place these prevention processes. And for them to do that, they need to actually educate themselves on disability positivity, the fact that society is disabling, and what adjustments are possible and reasonable. Because the narrative around adjustments, and I'll talk a bit more about that with the DSE, the narrative around adjustments is people think, oh, I have to do a lot, it's going to be really expensive. But most adjustments to support a disabled person are not big capital intensive items. Of course, for mobility challenges, yes, ramps, lifts, things like that. But they have been, over time, been happening. Still not adequate, of course, but these big capital works take time to plan, take budget cycles, all of that. But there's a whole lot that can be done around, in a workplace or in a school where you're just modifying the environment. You're enabling people to use what they need, not impacting anyone else, use what they need to be able to access a service, a career, and education. So it's a really exciting time, and I love legislation reform. So this is kind of my wheelhouse. I get really excited by it, looking line by line. But you guys don't have to do it. I'll do it for you. So and
Goodness.
making sure we certainly get the non-visible, because there's a lot of ignorance. It's not willful, it's just lack of lived experience around that. The overwhelming majority of disability is non-visible. Overwhelming majority. The overwhelming majority of NDIS participants have non-visible disabilities. In that bucket includes the neurodivergence, but it also includes psychosocial disability, any uh, non-visible, also a person that is non-seeing or non-hearing. You can't observe a person unless there is an aid around them. It's a non-visible disability. Then all of the internal organs disabilities and things like that, and chronic fatigue, and so visible disabilities have rightly got a lot of attention because it's tangible to those that don't have lived experience. But it really is a very small proportion. And I want that attention to be given to the visible disabilities, but I want the equal attention to be given to the non-visible disabilities, and to reduce that stigma as well, and also reduce that ableism around, oh, you don't look disabled, which is highly offensive. You can't tell someone their experience of life.
Oh, I love that so much. And so often we see those non-visible disabilities, especially in the autistic community, right? Where there were this idea that you couldn't take them to a disabled bathroom because there was like a sensory overload in the main
Yeah.
bathroom because of all the hand dryers and the noise and whatever else. So, you're not in a wheelchair, so you're not entitled to go in
Correct.
there. And I think that is something that we really that needs to take into account, because it's such a broad aspect of what disability looks like and how
Yeah.
it's impacting our beautiful babies and their lives, how it's impacting autistic adults and their lives. So I love that it's your wheelhouse, because I tell you, I could not read through legislation. So I am so glad that you're doing it and that you're very good at it. So in terms
Just to
of the
pick up,
disability,
sorry, just pick up on the
oh no, you go.
the international symbol for disability, of course, being the wheelchair logo, and there's a lot of discourse globally around that it's a limiting identity, And so therefore society thinks, yes, that where there's an accessible symbol, whether it be parking or whether it be toileting, that it's for that particular category of disability. But there's like it's a whole schematic of different disabilities, but it's one of those hard things. So it's around education that, yes, anyone with accessibility needs is able to use those bathrooms, those facilities. With parking, it's a little bit different because there's actually a permitting system, but there are numerous people who are permitted through their GP and through the regulatory authorities to use those parking spots as well. But there's a whole lot of aggression and anger imposed on those individuals, which again in itself is re-traumatizing and disabling.
No, thank you for adding that. It's true. Like I never really thought about the symbol for disability, which very you're so right about the wheelchair, but there's so much more that's included in that and under that umbrella.
Yeah,
Going to the disability standards for education, can you just
yeah,
explain what that means to
sure.
parents or anyone who's listening?
Sure. So under the DDA, there are three standards. One is the disability standards for premises. So it's that accessing places and spaces. One is the disability standards for transport. So accessing public transport, different modes of transport. And then there's the education standards, which I'll call the DSE. I'm really hopeful in the future there'll be a disability standard for employment, because education can be, you know, from age 5 to 25. That's a big chunk of someone's life. But employment can be from 25 to 65. That's also a big chunk of life. But there's no consistent approach to the employment space. There's the Fair Work Act. There's just a broader discrimination piece, but it's not as clear and it's not mandatory. Putting aside employment, so back to the DSE, these are actually legal standards that the duty holders listed under them are required to actually comply with. So the DSE, they apply to early childhood education, primary school, secondary school, tertiary education, and the TAFE sector. So it's the whole breadth of the education facilities. It's public providers, private providers, independent schools, RTOs, so registered training organisations, and the Catholic sector. No one is exempt from this. You will find often that the public sector is more, well, in some cases, it's more aware of its obligations because it's government, and government tends to be required and tends to understand its own duties. Again, there's a sliding scale, there's variation, but the private sector is probably a bit of a lag behind. So the independent schools, the Catholic schools. But again, you have some standouts in those as well, because it's about lived experience. It's about, a lot of the independent schools, in particular around neurodiversity, have been set up to support neurodivergent children. So of course, they are understanding, but they're coming from an empathy, compassion, supportive approach, as opposed to a legal approach. But the legal does intersect. So these standards, really importantly, there are two really important things. You don't need a diagnosed disability. It needs to be imputed, which means suspected. That's really important because access to diagnosis is really expensive and takes a long time. And you don't want the student, to be without those supports. The second one is that the overarching objective is that every child must be able to access education on the same basis as a child without disability. So the same basis. That's a really good clarifier, and it really leads to, rejecting segregation. It also leads to rejecting making the education lesser, like a lesser standard, or presuming incompetence. So babysitting children in an education facility? No. The standard requires that every child is to receive that education on the same basis as any other child. And so this also goes to things such as suspension and expulsion. You may have read or heard that it's around about 90% of children suspended and expelled from schooling system, primary or secondary, are disabled. And of that, it's around 75% are autistic.
Really? I had no idea that the stats were that high.
It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, and so discriminatory as well. And the way that you know, the way that this is happening, unfortunately, is that the behaviour is targeted, not what's causing the behaviour. So whether it's a violent outburst or a safety incident can lead to suspension, and if it recurs, expulsion. But that is a blunt instrument, and there are many, 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 many steps that a school or a university or a TAFE are required to actually undergo before that point. Whereas what we find, a lot of principals just go bang. I've seen this behaviour, it's been repeated, here's your consequence. Whereas, as we know, as neurodivergent parents in particular, the behaviour is a result of something. It's a communication, it's a child having a stress response. Their nervous system is so overloaded that they are in survival mode. And that survival mode, often manifests as fight or flight. It can as fawn and all the masking that occurs, but those children that mask are very rarely suspended or expelled, but they have the flip side of the coin, the significant mental wellness impacts as well. But so it's getting the educating the schools to understand, okay, communication, so behaviour is communication. What's causing this to happen? And I turn to schools and say, what have you done to make this child feel so unsafe? The onus is on you as a school, as an educated facility. It's not on the child, because the child is dysregulated. Also, the child is a child. They actually haven't developed the cognitive uh, progression to adulthood. And for our little ones, that can be more delayed as well because of the nervous system formation and the emotional maturity as well. So I turn back and say, well, you've got obligations, school. Why is this school so unsafe for this child? What are you going to do about it? It's not the child's responsibility. It's not the family's responsibility. School, what are you going to do about it? And most of the time they go, oh, oh, okay. And then they say, well, what do I do? How can you help me? And it's like, well, first of all, understand your obligations, learn, get your professional development. On professional development, one of the things, the 4-year Bachelor of Education, I've spoken to a number of teachers that have been through 10 years ago. They get about 1 day on neurodivergence out of those 4 years. When you think 1 in 5 individuals is neurodivergent, that is woefully inadequate. Woefully inadequate.
Possible in this day and age that, like you just said, the stats are 1 in 5, and they're getting such little professional development. No wonder teachers are leaving in droves, feeling
Yeah,
like they're inadequate because they don't have the training to be able to support what they're seeing in the classrooms. That's
exactly. And the curriculum is skewed too far for the teacher education is skewed too far to the pedagogy about the instructional model. It completely forgets what I refer to as the client, as the child, as the student. You've actually got to understand who your audience is, who your clients are. And yes, they haven't got the skills, and in no way do I blame the teachers for that. I blame the university sector for that. But I do blame executive leadership within schools because they are the ones that actually control the professional development, the ongoing professional development. So another exciting thing is that the disability standards for education are being reviewed as well. And next week, those submissions close, and I've participated in a lot of online forums and conversations as well. And again, anything that happens in the review to the Disability Discrimination Act will flow through all the standards. So that positive duty will flow through all the standards. One of the really good things, and I forgot to mention it with the review of the DDA, is the concept of what's a reasonable adjustment is so subjective. Because I can go to a school and say, well, my children get an adjustment in this space. So my school thinks it's reasonable. Why aren't you doing it for the children that need it here? It's too subjective. So the recommendation in the review is that we remove the word reasonable. It's an adjustment. And that will flow again through into the DSE. Also, a lot of schools think, it's going to take a lot of time to do adjustments, or it's going to cost a lot of money. Again, no, it's not. It's allowing the child, the student, to have what they need to access that education. And even things just like the sensory supports, whether they are ear defenders or fidgets or proprioception or wobble chairs, things like that. They don't harm anyone else, but they give that child the right sensory balance to be able to access education. And
So oh, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
no, go, you go.
I was just going to say, touching on what you were saying before about when you go into schools and you're like, this is what we can do to make a child feel safe. What are schools obliged to do? Like, what are they obligated to do? Because I feel like parents, and there's so many parents in this boat, Megan, that will walk into a school and say, here is my beautiful child, please take care of them.
Yeah,
And just fingers crossed that it all sort of works out. And when it doesn't work out, they don't know what their rights are versus what the school's rights are and how
sure,
much to push and all that sort of stuff. So can you just
sure.
explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So I often hear that, an individual teacher is not receptive. And I say, well, that teacher's not actually the duty holder here. It's the school that's broader. So there must be a leadership person, whether it's an assistant principal for wellbeing or disability inclusion, or there's a special subject matter expert like a DI coordinator. They're the one that brings together the whole school approach. So what I say, how I go about it is try to understand the profile of the child. So looking at the diagnostic reports, any therapy goals, any particular recommendations made by any service provider, and see which of those ones apply to an education setting. And so it's not things that are home-based or food-based or things like that, but which of those can transfer into an education setting. Then the first thing to do is to seek a meeting with leadership, because under the Disability Standards for Education, there must be a consultation. It can't be the school saying, well, I will do A, B, C, and D, because I've had an autistic child at this school before. I know what an autistic child needs. And it's like, oh my God. No, you've had one autistic child. That profile is for that child. Let's look at this child before you right now. And then establish what the triggers are for that child, whether they're sensory, whether they're noise, whether they're overwhelmed, whether they're um, crowded, heat, all of these things. A lot of them can be sensory, but some of them can be processing as well. Some people receive information better auditory. Some people are more visual. Some require both to actually receive information and retain information. So working out what that child's strengths are, where there are some challenges, how do we navigate those challenges to turn those into to strengths? And that senior leadership team around the table talking with the family, it must be a consultation and it must be agreed about what supports the child needs. And they can be curriculum based. So adjustments to like no homework, adjustments to tasks, support in initiating tasks, not, as I said, not reducing the curriculum content, but breaking it down into more manageable pieces so the student can demonstrate competency rather than just looking at a task and going, oh, I don't know where to start. So breaking it down to adapt to learning styles. And then, so it can be curriculum, it can be social. So it's how do we support the regulation, um, peer interactions? How do we support navigating that adult relational safety? And it can be so the emotional, and it can be what particular sensory inputs and outputs are required, what particular learning spaces, like reduce light, reduce sound, away from doors, away from any printers that are humming in the background, and having breakout rooms, things like that. And yeah, and the social, the peer interactions are real. It's a real difficulty. I still have that now. You don't grow out of this. It's a real challenge. So you learn your own strategies as you're an adult, but of course, we've got to give our little people time to actually work out how they like to engage with people and find their neurokin, find their people that um, you know make them happy as well. So supported peer interactions in the playground as well. Um, a lot of our little ones, and as we grow up and we still retain it, have a real sense of right and wrong, real sense of rules around justice, and that can be really, really hard in a playground. And it can be really overwhelming if rules aren't followed, and then that's when you get some challenging behaviours that are resulted of the little person feeling so anxious and unsettled that they're in fight mode as well. So the school can actually provide adjustments across those domains. It's not just about this child will sit down at their desk and learn this item by term 1. It's like, oh, hang on a sec. No, this child will be given support by doing A, B, C, D, E, F to enable them to confidently participate in this activity. And if we get 5% done, that's success. If we get 10% done, whatever. So it's putting the onus back on the school the whole time. You cannot require a child to self-initiate, to self-start, and to self-regulate at the age they are.
Oh, absolutely. Like this idea that they're like mini adults. Who concocted this idea that they were going to be able to regulate themselves at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 years old? Like it's
Yeah,
just ridiculous. And I think it's setting them up to fail already before they've even gone in to do whatever they need to do. So I'm so grateful that you are doing the position that you're doing, because I can clearly see that you're so passionate about it, but that you get it, that you've
yeah,
done the hard work, you've done the literature, you get and understand the laws.
yeah,
So because so many schools, unfortunately, are, I'm sure, trying to do what they feel is the best that they can do, but it
mm,
sometimes is far from the best. And maybe because they don't know, or maybe because they choose to turn a blind eye, we'll never know. But having someone in your space to be able to say, okay, this is what we can do and this is what it looks like, is so important and so refreshing as well. So I love that.
yeah. And
We've touched a
also,
little.
sorry, one
No,
thing
you go, you
also,
go.
never let the school tell you to pick your child up unless your child wants to be picked up. The school is the duty holder here to help that child co-regulate and get to a space of learning. So never get them to just put their hands in the air and say, come and get the child, can't deal with it. So no, because one of the thing is it reinforces the poverty cycle of families in this space that have to come out of work for themselves, work part-time. No, there's a duty on the school, but let it be child-led. The number of times I've heard parents say, I've been told to go and collect my child at this time every day, and they get there and the child says, why are you here, Mum? Why are you here, Dad? And they're internalising a penalty now. They think they're not wanted at that school. They've been told they can't be there. They've done something wrong when none of those things have occurred. Also, push back if a school says, we want this child on a reduced timetable. Well, no. The DSE says you must provide an education on the same basis. Are all kids on a reduced timetable? No. Again, if that's what the child and family want, that's fine. But don't let the education provider actually dictate those terms.
I'm so glad that you said that, because there are so many parents who know this is a very, very valid and lived experience that they're currently going through right now, where they're having to pick their child up early. And if they don't have that information, how can they make any changes? So, and we don't want our kids thinking that they have done something wrong, because they're not. That, it's, don't get me started, because I get very upset when I see that, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
When we talk about, and you touched a little bit on like how we support our child, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that in terms of what it looks like between the school and child?
Yeah, so there are some formal processes that I always recommend. Um, any child with a disability or imputed disability is eligible to have an individual learning plan or profile. They're called slightly different between different jurisdictions, different types of schools, things like that. But essentially, they're the same. Essentially, there are, what are the learning needs of this child? What the school will do to support those learning needs? What are the emotional and social needs? What the school will do to support? Document them down. Everyone has the same idea, the same plan. It's a plan with a big P, even in its name. And then every adult at the school will be provided that. I often hear principals say, oh, no, it's a privacy issue. And I'm saying, the family right next to me right here is saying, I want you to provide it. It's not a privacy issue. They want it because every adult in a school environment interacts with your child. They all need to know because, they're in yard duty, they're at the school office. They all need to know. And also, disability is not something to be ashamed of. Let's provide every adult at the school with the information on how to support that child. So getting that plan in place. And that plan must be agreed. It's not a plan that the school puts in place and says, here you go, or doesn't even hand it to the family. And then every term has to be reviewed. Because as we all know, autism is a dynamic disability. And as the kids move into different grades or do different expectations, different social expectations, as they get into upper primary and into high school, it needs to be a live document as well. And in a mainstream or public school around the country, there are additional formal processes that can attract funding, federal or state funding, for a school to support the child. For example, in Victoria, it's called a disability inclusion profile. It's an updated version of, there used to be a funding profile for students with disability, but it was very, very, very narrow, and it was mostly geared at physical support needs, whether it be support feeding, toileting, or mobility. Whereas this disability inclusion profile, there are 31 different domains that a school and the family assess whether the child needs minimal support, substantial support, or extensive support. And if you meet a minimum number of substantial and extensive supports, the state government in Victoria provides an allocation of money for the school to maintain those supports. The money is attached to the student, so wherever the student goes, the money goes, but the money is not exclusively used to support the student. So there's principal discretion. And in that comes some challenges as well, because you might not think that your child is getting the supports they need, and you know the supports they're funded. So being conscious of that, keeping the school accountable, holding them to account. Yeah.
So how does it look though then when, let's say Bobby goes to a school, he's got a level 3 diagnosis, he's non-speaking, he gets the highest amount of funding possible, right? Great for Bobby. But then if that funding then doesn't really go to Bobby, it goes to like a variety of different students to be able to support all students. Is that what's, I guess the question is, I've had parents get really frustrated at that model and
Yeah.
feel like their child isn't supported, like they're getting, huge amounts of money, great, but none of that the money's really coming to Bobby. It's going
Yeah.
to everybody else in the class. How does it best? And I know that you'll explain it way better than I will, but how does that translate?
Yeah. So everything within the individual plan needs to occur. So if they're not occurring, because the money has been essentially the individual plan, there's been observations over 10 weeks about how that plan's working. Those observations, the plan and any reports go to, say, the Victorian Department of Education or the relevant department in other jurisdictions. And then the funding is relevant to maintaining those supports. So if you're thinking, if you've got a child there that those supports have been withdrawn, go straight to the principal and say, you have received funding to maintain the supports we've agreed to. Reinstate those supports. Otherwise, you are not complying with the actual regulatory requirements. Yeah, so there's a lot of evidence to get that funding, and if those supports are being reduced or denied, that funding then is at risk, and schools never want to lose funding. So, you've got a lot of power in this space. It just takes understanding the process. Often parents are gaslit, and they become the parent problem. And then that's where someone like me, I come in and I can be that independent person that says, well, hang on, this is what, say, in a plan, or this is what you've promised, you're not doing it. Tell me why that's happening. Why are you failing this child? They don't like hearing that, but you've got to hold them to account, and I can be that buffer because the family still needs to maintain a relationship with the school. I don't. I need to hold them to account. So I think it's really important to be able to provide that support to families who, like we are barely treading water. And it can be very easy to go, I don't know what to do, or I'm going to pull my child out. And the amount of homeschooling, as you know, Natalie, the homeschooling trajectory has been exponential because the schooling system is failing everyone. And it's easier for a school to say, yeah, this school's not for you. This school's not for your child. Go somewhere else. Then another school says, oh, we can't actually support you. It's like, well, no, you have a legal obligation to do so. So you tell me how you're going to do that and comply with the law. So there's some really
It's
strong powers there.
Yeah, it's bananas though how many parents are told, yeah, no, we don't have the capability, so you're best off going elsewhere.
Yeah,
And I know for a fact that there's so many parents out there that have heard this, and it's a blow to the parent just as much as it is to the child.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and that idea that their confidence is just going to be shot because yet again here's another institution that doesn't want me or doesn't want us, and what that does to you as a person and your belief in your child to be able to succeed. It's truly heartbreaking, and I think that schools absolutely need to be doing better. They really need to be lifting their game, and I hope that these changes are the reforms that we need in order to
Yeah.
see that happen. um,
Yes.
so, okay, so we talk about coming into the school and saying, okay, well, how are you helping this child? How are we going about doing this? How do you ensure that they actually uphold what the things that they say they're going to do? Like, how are you, because obviously parents aren't in the classroom. So, what does that
No.
look like?
No, so that's why having that formal documentation that's reviewed every quarter. and having that dialogue, having the dialogue with the teacher, who's actually implementing that in a primary school. In a high school, you've got multiple teachers doing it, and the parent knows when things aren't working because the child is demonstrating it either verbally or non-verbally, um, and so it's obvious something isn't working. And I wouldn't leave it to the court, the termly plan review meeting. I would, yeah. One of the things that I think one of the things that I wrote for you, Natalie, my motto is, who cares what people think? This is about your child. It's really hard though to, um, particularly if you're a natural people pleaser and a peacemaker, which that's not my natural state, fortunately, but it comes with other challenges, of course. Um, this is the child. I am the advocate for my child. No one else knows, apart from family unit, what this child needs, and I'm telling you what this child needs. What you're doing is not working. Let's make it work. Yeah, it's really also important if that when you are looking at a school, understanding. You can look at all the policies and procedures and their annual reports and all of those things, but speak to the parents that are there already. Speak to the kids that are there or have been through there. People know about the culture of the school, and it can turn on a new principal or a new leadership as well. But go in there and say, this is my expectation, and I need a teacher allocated to my child who is comfortable with regular communication, who doesn't feel threatened by that. So I know at our school each year we get asked, what particular circumstances that you would like going forward for your child next year? And I always say, well, okay, we need to have a teacher that is quietly spoken, non-combative. We need to have a teacher that is a single teacher for a classroom, not a split teacher, because having two teachers throughout a week is very unpredictable. It's very uncertain to their different style, their different communication style, the way they even run the particular program. Having to navigate that multiple times a week is really difficult. And then I put in highlight a teacher who's comfortable with regular communication, because that it's really, really important. Again, I understand that I have the privilege of being able to go into my children's school and speak to them a lot. Some parents simply can't do that for work reasons or distance reasons or cultural reasons as well. But if you put it in writing, at least you've put your voice forward, or you ask someone else to assist you, whether it be an advocate through one of the government-funded advocacy bodies like the ACD, Association for Children with Disability, or whether you go the private route through someone like myself to be able to help you navigate that process.
Love the open communication, but sometimes we don't know what to ask. Like we can see our child is failing and it is not failing. Take that back. Take that
Yeah.
out of my mouth. We can see our child is dysregulated. We can see our child is not coping at school. And when you get a parent who's thinking, well, what questions do we ask
Mm.
to keep that open dialogue open? Because a lot of the time, and I have it on good authority that when my son was at a special needs school, there was a teacher there who was actually an aide. She had moved away from being an aide, and when I asked her about I used to always come to her and say, like, how was his day? And she was like, oh, it's great. He had a great day. And then afterwards, she actually said, well, we've been told not to share what has happened during the day. So if a child has had an aggressive meltdown, if a child has had something that's happened and they've all been witness to it, we were not at liberty to be able to say, well, this is what had happened. And we were like, well, okay, well, how do we then we don't marry up then the behavior that comes home because it is
Correct.
regulated from what they've seen. And no shade on the child who's obviously been dysregulated and had that meltdown,
Mm.
because obviously something has happened to cause that meltdown. But then
Yeah.
what do we do then if we're going in blind? How do we then keep that open form of communication? How do we then know what questions to ask? Sorry, that was a very
Yeah.
roundabout way of
That's okay.
saying
What
that.
I think a question that is I think is non-threatening. I think it's simple. Is what did you do today to support my child? Open-ended. They can come back and say, well, little Bobby, your example, had some challenges in first lesson, so he took himself to the quiet space and had some fidgets and stuff, and then he wandered back. Or Bobby wasn't feeling comfortable doing PE today because he gets fatigued really easily. So the PE teacher said, okay, can you help me keep the rules? Can you monitor the rules and make sure everyone's doing what they should do? So things like that. What did you do today to support my child?
Okay, that's good. I'm glad that you said it in such easy to understand terms, because sometimes as parents, we feel like we don't have the authority to ask these questions because somehow this school is being put up on a pedestal,
Yeah,
and we don't want to, we don't want to, don't piss them off, don't make them angry, because we don't want to get kicked out or we don't want to cause trouble. Like, again, that people pleasing element is
yeah,
so very much ingrained.
yeah,
And so we just want to make sure that, they're going, great, 2 thumbs up. We don't really care about anything else. We just want to make sure that they're going. And sometimes that's just not enough.
yeah,
Okay, so then I wanted to go through this last question, which is how can we provide help and support to families and to parents who are navigating these really difficult situations, who maybe English isn't their first language and they don't know, or maybe they're overcome with overwhelm and grief and they are themselves
yeah,
just barely coping because they're, an autism diagnosis wasn't what they deemed was going to be in the cards for them. How does that look for them to be able to get that support?
yeah. So one of the really great things about social media, and particularly Facebook, is there are multiple communities who are living, breathing, experiencing what each of us is doing. So one of the things is to know that you're not alone. You haven't failed. You have a different paradigm for life. It's neither better nor worse. It's different. And seeking support from peers who from adult autistics as well, who have already been through and probably obviously have a bit of more cognitive maturity to be able to explain what worked for them. And again, what worked for them might not work for your child, but understanding that autistic children become autistic adults. And I think that can be a shock to society, thinking that it's only a childhood experience, but no. So lived experience is critical here, absolutely critical. And to know that there are ways for your children to be given an education on the same basis and be successful. And I mean, the number of successful people that have come out as adults diagnosed autistic, the creativity, the intellectual, the human rights element, the strong sense of justice, all of those things, it is the world has lots of opportunities. You can't pigeonhole a child based on a diagnosis or the colour of their skin or their gender or whatever. In a society like Australia, all of those attributes should be completely irrelevant. I know we're not there yet. I know we're not, but completely irrelevant. So look to your community, find your community. Don't try and force a narrative or force a lifestyle that doesn't suit your family. Don't accept criticism and just you say, look, sorry, you don't know what I'm doing on my experience. When you do, come back and tell me about yours, but yours will be different to mine anyway. So thanks very much, but I don't want anything to do with you. But yeah, so look out for a lot of free online events around navigating various things. but really make sure that they're from lived experience, because the last thing you want to hear is from someone othering us, like saying, autistic people do this. It's like, oh, really, do we? How do you know that? And you may have met someone who does that, but don't homogenize us, and certainly don't underestimate us. But you use what tools you have. Use Natalie's podcasts. Use all of the and you can just do a word search as well for in Facebook to find groups. And 9 out of 10 groups are absolutely wonderful and neuroaffirming. Some have, some problems, but then you just stop following them. And if something doesn't feel right to you, don't do it. If someone tells you, oh, you should do this, but, trust your gut, don't do it and say, no, this is not going to work for us. Thanks very much, but no thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of, as you would know, there are a lot of therapies out there that are not quite conventional for autistic children. And I always say, if I would I do it to myself? If I would do it to myself, then okay, well then maybe I would consider it for my child. But this idea of giving children enemas, which I'm not a big fan of. Like, I wouldn't want to give myself an enema. I'm definitely not giving my child an enema.
No.
And I'm sure there is like research. I don't want to have one, and I don't want my kid to have one. Great, no problems. But that we always go back to that. Like, we want to make sure that they are seen, they are heard, that their voice matters, even if they are non-speaking. Even if they are non-speaking, they still have a voice. They
Absolutely.
still have. And I want parents to know that, because obviously there is that idea that, well, they can't talk, so that, we have to advocate for them. Yes, we do have to advocate for them, but they still do have a say in how their life is being lived. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add?
I think radical acceptance of your situation is really, really important. You can't change what you're experiencing. Don't judge yourself what you're experiencing. Don't try, as I say, easy, don't. Try not to internalize other people's views of you and parent blame and say, well, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Try not, just live the day. Live each day, because each day is fabulous. Yeah, each day can be really, 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 really hard. But this is not about changing anyone. This is about being authentic. And this is about assuming everyone you see, including yourself, that you're competent in whatever it is, that you're competent. And just get the support that you need. Lean on people. The most important, the people that will help you the most are those that are living it themselves.
Such excellent words of advice. I totally agree with you. And if they've gone through it themselves, then they can absolutely give you a viewpoint that maybe you haven't considered before, and that you can take it into account. Megan, where can people find you?
Easeaccessconsulting.com.au. I'm on Facebook as well under Megan Davison, and I pop up on a whole range of Facebook groups, putting in some ideas for people to take, or supporting individuals, and if they so choose to get formal help, I'm absolutely always available.
Thank you so much for your time, Megan. I so appreciate you coming out. I know you've got to go back to a workshop, but I think that it's so important for people to know what their rights are, what the school's rights are, and how we can really be supporting that bridge and bridge the gap between the two. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.